comes to your experience being in multiple communities. I know that you're very involved with us here at the Sprocketeer community, but I just want to hear about your experiences in multiple and what that's been like for you.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my job roles, I have many, I wear many hats, including this one, which is now the official Sprocket Pod hat. I don't wear it any other time except that. One of those is community, is engaging with community, engaging with folks who are in the RevOps world. And I think part of that was because I began to develop those relationships over time. I was at a previous role where I was quite heavily involved in those communities, though I wasn't doing it as part of my job. I was doing it just because especially in the midst of COVID, that was where people were gathering. And so I became familiar with some of the ones that other folks might know of, Genius, RevOps Co-op, and some more niche ones. And then from there, it became pretty clear that organic community is a place where you can get authentic experiences and feedback. And especially in kind of the world we operate in, where there's a lot of trust put in fellow operators and maybe some questioning of other people. It's a really great place to kind of network and become part of the community. So I'm a member of quite a few. And it's interesting because I think that each community has its own character. I think the very obvious breakdown is they're like basically two camps in our world, right? There's like the Salesforce world and the HubSpot world, and they all have their own communities in the digital world and in the meat space, and they're very different. And so I had that experience quite recently. The big event we went to in 2023 was Inbound, where you and I met. And that's obviously like the Super Bowl for HubSpot every year. And that's a shorts and a t-shirt most of the time kind of vibe, which is very much my vibe. But Salesforce had their World Tour Dreamforce event in New York City, which was a 1 day event. And I went for the whole day, and it was quite clear the difference between in the character of those two communities. There's not better or worse, but different. There was definitely more of a button down shirt approach there. I think in the Salesforce world, there's almost an entire language that people speak that is internal. They have these very in-depth paths you can go down for training and certifications, and it's a very closed gated world in the Salesforce ecosystem. And so I think that kind of is reflected through the community as well. Whereas I think HubSpot has less gates around it. And so there are different things, and it's tough to keep track of all of them, right? I am in, I think, 10 Slack communities, and then there's LinkedIn, there's Discord, there's just general network, and it's very difficult to keep track of all of them. And I have been trying to figure out a way to use maybe AI to help me prioritize, but that's still a work in progress. So yeah, that's my experience. I know that you're essentially managing and being the admin of Sprocketeer, and recently you transitioned over from using Discord to Slack. I'm interested to hear what that's been like.
Successful. There were a lot of people that, when we were in Discord, alluded to the fact that they were only there for Sprocketeer. And I remember when I was very active in Discord and I was asking people for feedback, the amount of people said the only reason that I have this is for this community. And I keep a tab dedicated to Sprocketeer open on my computer for it. That was a pretty big signal of there's friction here, and more people do not keep dedicated tabs only for our community, which makes sense. And there were a lot of internal conversations behind the scenes around when do we move to Slack? How do we move to Slack? And I took a page out of Rev Partners playbook of move fast. And maybe I moved a little too fast, but I really just went and made the Slack community. And candidly, it was without a whole lot of permissions. And I didn't really wait for, yes, let's do it. But I started with a test group, and then we expanded from there into more people inviting people in. And it wasn't until we had Kyle Jepson that made a post, and all of a sudden we had 500 people that joined the next day, which is awesome. But for me, from a community perspective, things don't happen in a vacuum. And so it's not about doing what I feel is best, but doing what people want to give the best service possible. And I think that there's a lot that companies say they want in terms of being able to do that. But it's one thing that I know HubSpot does very well. A lot of people talk about the differences between the HubSpot forum community, like the formal HubSpot community, and the Sprocketeer community. What's the difference? Why would I be in both? And I think the HubSpot brass are probably going to see what's happening in the HubSpot forums much more so than what's happening in Sprocketeer. But Sprocketeer is a different kind of community. You get quick help, you get immediate feedback. And so that's something that I want to continue to improve on from a Sprocketeer perspective. I know that you're in multiple communities, not just for HubSpot, but again, like Rev Genius, we're both members of. One thing that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on is how we can continue to unite people who are revenue operations professionals, regardless of whether they use HubSpot or Salesforce or, shall we say, Zoho, Pipedrive, if they still exist. I think they might. But how do we unite more people across more communities?
It's a good question. I think first taking a step back, I think that this move to Slack was the right one. I think I may have been one of those people that told you that I only use Discord for one thing, and that's Sprocketeer. And now Sprocketeer fits very nicely in my big list on my open Slack here of different communities. And so it's definitely more convenient for me. And I'm just more used to the Slack interface. I think that there's cross community. If somebody's in one community, it's very likely they're at least in one other one. And so there's always ways in which you can engage people across those communities. Hey, I see that you're also in this community. But I think that cross posting and cross engagement between communities is just an organic, natural way to do it. Most communities allow, if you have an event, you can talk about, let's say a webinar or something like that, you can talk about it in those communities. And if the users' personas there are the same, then it's going to be interesting to them. And that's just another way of letting them know. But I think it's more of a natural thing. More people start moving over, more people start joining. I think as the HubSpot user base continues to grow, excuse me, Sprocketeers too will also grow. I'm going to take my hat off now. It's bothering me. And therefore, there's going to be a continued place. So even in some of the Salesforce admin groups I'm in that are very exclusively Salesforce, I have lately seen quite a bit of talk and them opening channels for HubSpot. So that should just give you an idea of what's the kind of movement happening. And this particular community is definitely one of the more insular, I would say, communities. And so the fact that's happening, I think, is a tell. And also of showing that there is a need for something like Sprocketeer and there's more room for growth. So
Yeah, and I know community is really your role when it comes to what you do
yeah,
on a day to day. And it's been interesting as we've continued to work together because I remember when we had first met at Inbound, we were kicking around ideas of what could community growth look like. But it's been really interesting the conversations that we've had, even just on this show, let alone
yeah,
within the Sprocketeer community as a whole, about how can we make the ecosystem better. And I know that there have been a lot of things that have been kicked around, but I think it really just starts with remembering that if, for example, if you're a HubSpot admin or you're a Salesforce admin, your job function within working at a company is very similar. You
right.
might be using one platform or another, but I know, and this is with my content as well, right? We get oftentimes sucked into this vacuum or this echo chamber of you're in one camp or you're the other. And I think it's important to remember that you can have an opinion, you can have your stance, but at the end of the day, having the respect for, listen, like if we're all doing revenue operations, having just that level of respect for the role as a whole. And I'm still going to make the sarcastic content and have fun with it. But I think that there's a long road to go in growing revenue operations, right? Regardless of what platform you look like, whether it's Zoho or otherwise.
Yeah. I think that these are brands, right? And so people identify with brands. And I think that sort of that the type of content you're putting out, I think, is a reflection of some of HubSpot's brand, and whereas Salesforce's brand is more, let's quote unquote, enterprise and button down shirts. And so that makes sense. I think that my personality probably, if it, on that binary, I would go closer to the more humorous side. But I also think it's a mistake, and I've told people this, to hitch their wagon to one thing, one tool. Your entire life is because it's in your role. It's your unless your job is specifically this. If you're in revenue operations, your job is based on an outcome, not a tool. The tools can change. You still need to be able to manifest the outcome, whether that the kind of aligned go to market team processes. The tool is just the means to get there. There are many means to get there, and it would be a mistake to try to see everything through the lens of a specific product. I do find that happens sometimes where when the only tool you have is the Salesforce, everything looks like a, I don't know, fill in the blank there. And you just try to fix everything that way. And I think that's a mistake. I've really pushed myself to stay agnostic across tools and really look for the most efficient solution. And I actually find a lot of that times the efficient solution is lives outside of the tools and is some sort of way to create plumbing between tools outside and put it back in. And so I use, for example, a lot of times if I'm doing automation of moving data around from one system to the next, or automating processes, trying to get something from HubSpot to Google Sheets to this or that, I'm actually using something called N8N, which is like a free Zapier type thing that you can self-host. It's open source. It requires a little bit more technical, but once you get the hang of it, you can do anything. And a lot of times in the company, I end up doing some of this stuff where we need some CRM admin work to get help with a data integration from a third party, and we just don't. There isn't the resource at that moment to set it up. Like I can figure that out, and I do it in an end. And it really doesn't matter what tool you use as long as the outcome is correct. And so I would caution people to ensure that they're not missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, and I think to that point, it's because you mentioned something really interesting. It's really important to water your plants where you want them to grow, right? So if you want to specialize in HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever tool or platform or CRM,
Yeah.
that's important from a personal growth perspective. I'm very bullish and I love HubSpot because it's so easy to use. With that said, there's a reason they call it market share, right? Companies want market dominance, but there's always going to be a HubSpot and a Salesforce and or other options. And so with that in mind, I think it's important to master the tool or the CRM that you want to master, but it's also important to recognize that there can be career opportunities in other avenues. Now, with that in mind, I think one thing Salesforce has done really well is they did it first, they did it big. I don't know if doing it first is the right way to say it, but there's a reason that everyone says if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. There's a reason for that. And they really came in and dominated the field when it came to like creating revenue operations. And then, oh, you have to use our tool to do RevOps because you're in our CRM. So I think it's only more recent that over the more recent years, I should say, but that HubSpot was like a viable career path. 10 years ago, you didn't go into HubSpot and become a revenue operations professional in HubSpot. You might have been a marketing professional, but I think revenue operations within HubSpot and now other burgeoning CRMs is becoming newer. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that point, that viewpoint that I have.
Yeah, it's extremely impressive that HubSpot has been able to penetrate the market the way it has, given the environment. I was talking to someone earlier today, and I was telling her, we were talking about CRM and data integrity, and I had mentioned the story of a CRM that was for PLG that made a big splash and then I guess is now shut down. And they raised a ton of money. They were the latest thing every VC talked about, but there really wasn't a market for it because you're not a CRM is extremely sticky, and no one is going to because it's the single source of truth. No one's staking their reputation on something they don't trust, and Salesforce has just developed so much trust over the years, so much equity. Like I said, they built this kind of internal ecosystem that is self perpetuating. And so the fact that HubSpot has been able to break into this space is extremely interesting to me because I don't know if it's anyone else could have done it, and speaks a lot to both their effectiveness as a company and also the how great of a product it is. But it's really an uphill battle. There is a lot of pushback from people that won't even consider that there is another option out there, which is interesting because it's not like the CRM itself is some sort of magical thing. It's we're talking about a relational database. If you really wanted to, you could
Yeah.
build a Google Sheets or certainly an Airtable that is a perfectly functional CRM. Obviously, it might not have all the bells and whistles, but it's not like it's this magical thing that no one can do. So it's interesting that's how it's broken down lately.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think makes HubSpot so special is because of how easy it is to learn. And I've done a few of the Trailhead certifications, and it is by far much more complex.
Much more, and
And
I think by design, in my opinion. But
will HubSpot look like that a decade from now? Maybe. I mean, who's to say, right? I would challenge someone to come in and try to learn Salesforce in 60 days, how far you get, versus try to learn HubSpot in 60 days, how far you can get. And every time you're going to be able to do and learn a lot more, a lot quicker with HubSpot just by virtue of the ease of use in its platform. Now, you can't rename a deal to something else, and I have worked with organizations and companies where that can be problematic. But at the end of the day, like that back end work, if you will, of the CRM is to me far outweighed with the ease of use and the rest of the versatility that the platform offers.
for sure, yeah, I agree, and it's baffling to me. I've heard people say, "Oh, our company, our use case, we need sales. We need something as powerful as Salesforce." But I've yet to hear somebody articulate why that's the
Yep.
case. What it is that something else can't do that Salesforce could. But yeah, I've also looked at the trailheads, and it's just I don't do well in school. I've never done well in school. I don't do well in. I'm a much more reverse engineer, try it, fail, and then figure it out kind of person, which I feel like HubSpot is very conducive to. I haven't taken the certifications because I basically had a HubSpot implementation thrown on my lap 2 or 3 times at this point, and just had to figure it out. And I do that. That's more comfortable for me. I don't think I could do that with Salesforce, though. I've had to go into Salesforce a lot recently and play around. But yeah, I think that there's a different language that use it's not SQL, it's SOQL when you're using Salesforce, right? Yeah, it's like, why does it need to be that? I don't know. What I would say is that the one time I felt that with HubSpot was when I moved my last company, I moved our website. It was a static Gatsby, so it was like written in React website, and there was no real CMS, and I was getting very frustrated. So I basically recreated the website on CMS Hub, and to do that, I had to learn the templating language, which is called Hubble. It's a kind of JavaScript type of templating language, whereas something like uses PHP. This Hubble is what, and so it took a little learning, and I spent a lot of time, a lot more time than I would have liked to, but I actually learned a lot from it. And that was, I think, the one time where I felt like this was a HubSpot specific language that was not super easy. I don't know if you have experience with CMS Hub, but it was definitely one of the more complex of the hubs that I've dealt with.
So I can speak insofar as that I've not dabbled with Hubble and learning it and figuring it out. I have used CMS Hub. And to the point that you just mentioned, not only have I experienced this, but I have worked with so many people. And the reason that I'm brought on board to work with so many organizations is because they have a marketing person or salesperson who at some point was told, figure it out. And I was that guy that had to figure it out, and I was able to, right? There's so much that you can literally, if you've used HubSpot for 60 days and then you're told, great, now make this better, you can figure a lot out.
Yeah.
And you really can't do that in Salesforce. Like in Salesforce, you have to understand how it works. You have to go through the certificate. Like you have to know how the system works. And I think that's really, if we distill, I think that's what's made HubSpot so successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the reason comes down to the fact that Salesforce was built at a time to support a sales motion that doesn't really exist today. The SaaS model, I think when Salesforce really became a thing, they were one of the first SaaS businesses. So they weren't really, it wasn't really built for that. And so it's been adapted over the years, but there's all this kind of technical debt, let's say, that it's built on top of that makes it more and more complex. We see that when people talk about their experience with Salesforce CPQ, which is a direct competitor of DealHub, insofar as that was similarly built on top of something that was really not built to support, let's say, the SaaS subscription model, certainly not the usage-based model. And because of that, the implementation and support for that product in Salesforce, even though their big pitch is it's a native Salesforce, it's part of Salesforce. Talk to any Salesforce admin that's dealt with an implementation of CPQ. I think most of them will say that it was a failed implementation, and B, they will have PTSD from that experience because there's so many complexities involved, and it was not purpose built to do what it's positioned to do. It was really built for manufacturing and selling widgets and not really selling software. And therefore, it becomes very complicated. But I think that was the way Salesforce itself developed. Whereas HubSpot got a later start, it was able to model its entire data model on, and things have shifted, but still able to do its data model based on the way we understand how businesses work today. So yeah.
Yeah, and I liken the CRM to a box. And if you imagine what do you want to achieve, right? If you're a business owner and you think about where do I want this business to go? And when everyone downloads their CRM or opens their CRM for the first time, it's a blank slate for everyone and every
Yeah.
business. And there's a reason why you can have two business owners that have the same idea and one excels and one doesn't. And there's a lot of reasons that could play into that. But if we think about it from a CRM tool perspective, right, being able to get into the box and make it do what you want it to do, that's important. And to the point you mentioned earlier, you can use Airtable, Asana, Google Sheets. That'll get you so far. At some point, if you realize I need to use a CRM and you pick one that you can't make it do what you want it to do, you're in trouble. And so I think it's really important, again, just back to the ease of use of HubSpot. And the reason I love it so much is because I think in simple terms. And if I want to be able to do something, being able to get in there and make it do what I want, HubSpot makes it easy. And I think a lot of business owners can identify with that sentiment.
Sure. For sure. But I remain surprised that the market to create a CRM that people use is so difficult to break into. I don't know why a Gong doesn't create their own CRM. Like they have such strong penetration to their niche that if they introduced the way that HubSpot did, they basically CRM HubSpot Sales Hub was this kind of free add-on it was a kind of a secondary thought. I don't think they ever thought it would be their main source of business. I'm surprised I don't see more of that happening today. But I think it comes down to that the CRM is just such a sticky thing, and everything is built on top of it that ripping it out and replacing it is just such a big lift. And the fact that HubSpot is able to do this is really a testament to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked with a lot of companies that coming into our engagement, they've said, we're using HubSpot. We want it to do certain things, but we don't know that it'll be our CRM forever because at some point we'll probably move to Salesforce. And then 6 months later, they're saying, all right, this is pretty cool. It's doing what we need.
Yeah.
Scratch that. And so I think that there's a very important element of self-awareness that business owners need to have, which is if you are experiencing problems and you're running into limitations, it may not be the software, it may be the team. And so whether that's a dedicated admin that you have, whatever the case may be, I think it's really important to recognize that like HubSpot as a tool is so versatile. And so when people ask, is this an enterprise level CRM?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so if you're doing 1 to 2 to $10 million in ARR, for example, and you're like, I don't know if this is going to fit my scale at 100 million, I can promise you it will. You just have to have the team and the plan and the infrastructure in place to make it do what you want it to do.
Yeah, I still don't even know what that means when people say, is this an enterprise level solution? Meaning, what is it that what they're looking, what is the variable here that they feel won't be supported? Is it just the volume of the leads that they're going to have in the system? Because that's certainly not, I think, an issue with HubSpot. Is it the amount of custom objects? I don't know what it is. Again, it's like whenever I hear people say, for our use case, we have to, the own Salesforce is the only option. I still don't know what it is that causes that makes them believe that.
I usually get a bit of a non-response when I ask that because I
Yeah,
do. And
it
I
seems
mean,
almost
typical,
religious. Like it's like,
yes.
just like a yeah, a faith, an article of faith.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a testament to their marketing team over at Salesforce and their ability to make people feel like I need Salesforce because that's an intangible, right? Somebody that thinks they need it is different from somebody who has a bona fide need for it. And I have yet to have anybody that's given me a use case that HubSpot has not been able to meet that Salesforce can. And so those situations may be out there. Certainly, there are going to be companies far greater than the scale of organizations that I have worked with that may fit those situations. But if we're talking about realistically, any company that's even considering using HubSpot because they're not already using Salesforce, HubSpot's going to be a viable option.
For sure. And obviously, I've never seen the tech stack of a Fortune 100 company, so I don't know
Yeah,
what
right.
goes on there. But yeah, I think that I'm not making a judgment on what's better and what's not better. I think that, again, companies should make decisions based on what's best for the company. What can the outcome rather than showing that they're using a certain product.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
yeah.
I would agree with that. I love HubSpot. I love it for ease of use. That's a very biased answer because I know how to use it. I love that other people can very easily learn how to use it. And to your point, neither of us have seen the inner workings of a Fortune 100, maybe even Fortune 500 company, right? And so to that end, there may be an inflection point where those conversations are being had, and Salesforce is certainly going to be a winner. It's certainly possible. But if we're talking about, again, realistically, the vast majority of businesses, companies, and organizations out there, I think it's a fair fight.
For sure. Yeah.
Mark, always a pleasure when we get to do these Sprocket pods. I can't believe that this is now episode 9 coming into the new year. I remember we did the
Yeah.
first one and we literally couldn't even make it go live. So, for anybody who might be watching this episode, this has been a really exciting time. I always enjoy it when we get to do our chats here.
Yeah. 2024 is going to be our year.
Awesome. Hey, keep doing a big Sprocket on. Bye, everyone.